and welcome to another wonderful episode of our podcast. Today, we have a guest that we've been waiting to get on a podcast for pretty much the beginning when we were with Natalie talking about, what kind of a guest we could get on the podcast. We were like, oh yeah, Alex. Alex would definitely be one of those great guests. And it's been now almost 3 years, and we finally have Alex. And it was supposed to be as it's supposed to be. The divine timing has said that now is the time to introduce you to Alex Galviz, or how she goes on social media as Authentic Alex. And this conversation is, as many of our recent ones, not just one thing. It isn't tips and tricks and insights, it is a story. Alex is a storyteller, she's a writer, she's a poet, but she's also a wild woman. She's a wordsmith, she's a witch, she's a person on an incredible life journey, and she shares glimpses and some of the lessons learned and the turns that she's been on over the past years with us. So I really think that this episode is grab a cuppa, sit down, put on a candle, if you want to put on an incense, cuddle up, enjoy this magnificent storytelling episode with Alex.
But before we get into the episode, hit that subscribe button, like, and share this episode with those who will really benefit from hearing Alex's journey and listening to this episode, or even watching it on YouTube. So hit subscribe, like, share. But now let's get into this really beautiful, gentle storytelling episode.
Hi, Alex. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting to have you here. This has been in the works for a while, and the divine timing has agreed that today is the day when it's supposed to happen for us to have this conversation. So thank you so much for being patient, trusting the universe, trusting us to come here and talk to us today.
I'm looking forward to it.
We have a bit of a background, the three of us together. We know each other. We have met in person. We have met in our, I would say, previous lives. We all have been on such an interesting journeys, and our paths have crossed before. But at the same time, I don't feel like I can give an introduction to who Alex is, because you've been through so many evolutions on such a wild journey since I first met you, when you
Yeah.
were more of a personal branding, LinkedIn expert and speaker. So I'm curious, in your own words, who are you right now?
Oh my God, what kind of a question is that? How long do we have? Do I even know the answer? So I'm Alex. I will introduce myself in this precise moment as a artist, a storyteller, and a poet. And it's been quite a long journey to get there. And it's been, as you know, lots of iterations, reinventions, changes, transformations to get to this place where this is where I'm at, and the titles that feel most like home to me at the moment.
And it's very true that, for me at least, obviously knowing you a little bit, watching your journey, the writing part has always been somewhere in there, be it when you were more in your corporate or marketing roles, you still had the part of having very personal journal, documenting your journal, sharing newsletters, basically doing random different styles of writing workshops. So I would love to know a little bit about your relationship with writing. What does it mean to you? Obviously, you call yourself poet, so you're going even deeper on that. But where does writing maybe start for you? What did it do for you along those years? Why is writing such an essential part of your journey?
Yeah, thank you for such a beautiful question. Um, Writing has been a massive part, and like you said, it's been a constant. It's the thing that I've kind of done consistently and has been like this underlying thread throughout my kind of life, and not just career, but also life. For me, it's really been a tool to almost kind of like a therapeutic tool slash process. It's always been something quite cathartic, something to help me process, understand, deepen into who I am, and answer that question. You know, I've always been fascinated by that question of who am I? And so to me, writing is the vehicle that helps me go towards that answer on a consistent basis and try and kind of get under the layers of who I am, you know, before the conditioning, the parental stuff, the societal stuff, the work stuff, and keep kind of digging. And you know, as a result, having had a blog for over 10 years on LinkedIn, like a newsletter, I've always said to people, I write for myself first and for you second. And you know, the beautiful thing is that it's helped a lot of people in the way in terms of recognizing themselves. I've always kind of vowed never to kind of teach very actively in my writing. I've always talked about my experiences, my stories, and people can take what they want from it and put themselves in my story in whatever way without feeling like I'm standing on a pedestal preaching with a megaphone of, you know, this is the way to live life. And that's what I've tried to do with my writing. And as you said, you know, I've for the last more than 5 years now started getting into poetry, and that's even sort of an even deeper layer. It's a lot of what I teach is how do we bring what's in the subconscious to the surface that wants to be healed, explored, made seen, witnessed. And it's just for me such a beautiful soul expression.
Yes, it is. And I totally resonate with kind of writing for yourself first and taking people on the journey, teaching by just this is what I've learned. This is my process, my experiences. If you want to take something from it, take it. If not, that's up to you. But I was curious, I know that you do also run workshops, you help people kind of tap into their creative minds and unlock something in their subconscious minds, help them with writing, and you use archetypes. So could you tell us a little bit more about, maybe where then the archetypes, how they come into writing, how we can work? Because if you say to people writing is powerful, you should be writing, journaling more. Often people are like, oh, I'm not a writer. I hate staring at a blank page. It's not working for me. I keep writing the same things. And I know that some techniques that you're using can really help us get deeper and get more of the juicy bits and get to the deeper understanding. As you said, kind of uncover some of the training and layers of society, education, trauma that we may have on ourselves. And for you, the modality that I know of is one of them, possibly, is the archetypes.
Yeah, so my history with archetypes kind of goes before the writing. I got trained in a psychometric tool called the Me Scan from a company based in the Netherlands. And it was this, you know, kind of like the Bell Bins and Myers-Briggs and all that kind of thing. I'd done quite a few, and then I got introduced to this one and I just fell in love with it. And I did because it felt very like it got underneath things, and it sort of gave a snapshot of where people are. And it's based on the idea by Carl Jung, the psychologist, that we're all born with a blueprint of, these natural talents that we have, and that under pressure, we kind of some of them might manifest in a way that makes us stuck, or we get things, things are difficult or stressful, etc. And so it's just being aware of what is our natural talent and what are the ones that are, he would call the shadow. And usually the ones that we're trying to reject, hide away, not show to the world. And that's how I kind of got introduced to archetypes, was using this tool, firstly having a scan done to me and then learning how to use it and doing it for others. And it was always so valuable. And I really fell in love with this concept around, we have these things that are innate in us. And, when you see them, you're like, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And it also makes sense what the shadow aspects of who I am are. And when we're not using these, shadow, or when we're under pressure in our shadow, we're losing energy, we're losing focus, we're getting stuck. And we're not even aware, potentially, if we're not aware of what those are, they're kind of driving the car. And so it's about how do we bring more self-awareness and become more conscious of what those are. Again, it's not, you can't erase them, delete them, get rid of them. They are part of who we are. So it's how do we understand what those are and begin to integrate them. And that's a whole process and journey. So when I got into the writing, I always had this idea at the back of my mind, like I would love to kind of do some kind of creative writing course that involves archetypes and really playing with our shadow and our light, because there's shadow and light in any archetype, playing with the symbolism of archetypes. And so there's a beautiful deck of cards by a artist called Kim Kranz, and it's an archetype deck. She has lots. She's quite known for her tarot, but this particular deck, it's my favorite. And I basically decided that I was gonna ask the universe, if I was gonna create a journey for people to write through, what are the archetypes that would be worth them exploring, and then kind of called in whoever wanted to join and who felt resonated with those specific archetypes, for where they were at life. And in the actual kind of workshops, I actually don't spend a lot of time explaining what archetypes are. I don't want to get people in their heads about, the logic or the science or the understanding. It's like, let's just get straight in. And people are always a little bit surprised, especially if it's the first time doing this kind of work with me, because they kind of, and also most people don't know what they're signing up for. They just assume I'm coming to write, and they're like, oh God, this is really deep and it's a little bit magical, and it's a whole journey and process. And I love that. I think if people probably knew what it entailed, they might be less keen. But people keep coming back, so I must be doing something right. But we use the cards because they've got images and they have no text, and get people to write about what is it that you see and experience. And I give them shorter prompts and talk, and then we have a little bit of discussion. If we're exploring the queen as the archetype, what do what's your relationship to the queen? Do you find yourself with those kind of traits? Who does it remind you of? And all these sort of bring conversations to the surface and stir things in people, and then the writing kind of allows it to come out. And most people also quite surprised by what they end up writing, because they're not using their kind of thinking brain. They're just diving straight into this. You don't have time to think. You just kind of have this stream of consciousness pour out. And I always say, sometimes in my classes, you will experience having this beautiful poem come out and it's perfect and you basically don't have to edit it and you're really pleased. And other times you'll hate what you write, and it has nothing to do with having a beautiful poem at the end. It will be about what it's shifting and changing and stirring in your system and psyche.
This is wonderful, and it reminds me that a while ago we also had a writer or writing coach talking more on this theme. And I remember from her that she always said that you can't write it wrong. And I think that's kind of what you literally just said is sometimes the writing that comes out, you subjectively think, oh, this is beautiful, this is genuinely a wonderful poem. And sometimes it's just words and they needed to come. They have their own purpose. The purpose might not be being a pretty poem to publish and to share with the world, but it's still something that needed to kind of be exposed in you and come out, and then you can work with it beyond, or just it's there, it's done, and you can burn it and move on.
And it's not an easy process. It's absolutely not an easy process, but it's also incredibly healing. I'm at the moment putting together my first poetry pamphlet, and I was, thinking about how do I describe what my poetry is, and something that came up, which I think is really accurate, is that it is a little bit like soul retrieval work. I don't know if you know the sort of shamanic work where you get guided to a place where you've had some kind of trauma or difficulty, and you do some healing work in your mind's eye. And to me, poetry has that same capacity to alchemize trauma and difficulty and sadness and grief. And that's how I came into writing poetry in the first place. Was I'd had my ectopic pregnancy. I was in the thick of grief, and my partner at the time used to do creative writing courses and said, I really think this will be helpful for you. And that was my entry point. So a lot of the first few poems that I wrote were very grief stricken and filled with tears.
I'm glad you're talking about poetry, because when you well, for me, when I've spoken to people about poems, and I know that you were taught at school, they got a rhyme at the end, and got to have the stanzas, and there's almost this right way and wrong way to write poetry. But if you read a lot of poetry and look, there doesn't seem to be a right or a wrong way. I guess it's if it feels like a poem, it doesn't matter how it comes out or how it is. And not everybody writes sonnets like Shakespeare, where I think it's every second line rhymes, and then the other four lines rhyme, and then the last two have to, there's a set if it's a sonnet or if it's a different type of poem or something. But yet, if you write a poem, just like you said, from the heart, or in your case, as a way to heal from your grief, it doesn't have to be a sonnet or a certain stanza or 4 verses each with 4 lines or something like that. And I think when I have spoken to people about poems, and it's something that I was at one time looking, but I couldn't quite get out of my head, is like, yeah, but you've got to have rhyming words, but it doesn't have to be like that. It can just be a poem. So the thing is, what makes it a poem as opposed to like a paragraph or a page of words? What defines it as a poem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is a massive debate in with poets and writers and academics. There is definitely something, there is definitely an academic poetry world. And those are your sonnets and your Shakespeares and your rhymes and your stanzas, and getting it to a certain, in a certain framework. And I've long debated, I almost applied this year, and I'm like, oh, I'm not sure whether to do a master's in poetry. And part of what makes me nervous is that I'm not your poet that's the academic side. I'm the one that kind of pulls poetry from thin air, because I always, think about when I'm writing poetry, I'm kind of writing it and I'm also not, or I should say I'm co-creating it. If you've heard of, the concept of being the vessel and letting source or creativity or God, whatever you want to call it, come through you, and how do you create the environments for that to happen? That's what I'm trying to create in these workshops, and also for my own writing, is how do I help you and me create an environment that allows these words to come through? Because sometimes I don't even know where it comes from and it just falls out of me. And I see it happen to other people. And that's not the same kind of poetry as the one I was just talking about. And I really love this kind of poetry, because for me, that's kind of poetry from the soul. And then what I do is I then edit and change and shift to kind of help it be a bit more framed in a poetry kind of capacity way. But I don't really care personally. I'm more interested in whether it touches my heart and whether it awakens something. And if it makes me think about something or change something, that's the kind of, for me, that's the magic of poetry. I don't need it to rhyme. I don't need it to be structured in a certain way. It's not what I'm looking for and what I want in my own poetry. And, there is a part of me that feels like I would love to learn more about the kind of more classical style of poetry, and see if I can merge these two things. I'm curious about that. I'm not kind of for and against. I don't think it's either or. But, when people come to me and they're like, oh, I've never written before, can I join your course? I'm like, of course. There is absolutely no prerequisite of needing to write or knowing how to write or having done something like this before. And 9 times out of 10, people produce things and they're like, whoa, I had no idea that I could write this. And, it's quite an emotional process, because all of a sudden they open a tap and it's just like flowing through. Obviously, that's not always the case with everyone, but sometimes it takes people longer, but they eventually, I do 6-week programs. Eventually, by the end, something's shifted. I recently did one, and it was someone whose work requires them to be incredibly logical, and by the end, it was flowing in a way that, and I said to them, you know, can you see the distinction between when you started and what's coming out at the end? And it was really obvious. And that's the beauty of what I'm trying to create, is to get people to find a way to express themselves in a way that they haven't been able to, and see themselves in a different way.
And you touched on this kind of possibly tapping into the universe, into the energy, and allowing that to kind of you be the vessel for the wisdom and insights and poetry, magic almost come through you. And this is, if you're okay to talk about it, I know that you are, more and more, slightly, bit by bit, coming away from the corporate world, from the very structured and rigid, and leaning more into the magic, into the intuition, into the witchcraft, into the heart-centered, soul-led, whatever label we want to put it. I would love if you are happy to talk a little bit about then your journey into the witchcraft.
Yeah, I'll probably correct you in terms of like I've kind of come away from the corporate world. I have a 9 to 5. I work very much in the corporate world. I work for a big pharma, which is an interesting thing given the other, you know, I feel like I'm in one foot in one world and one foot in the other. And it's been quite a journey to accept that I am so much a businesswoman and a strategizer and a visionary and, you know, all that kind of businessy good stuff. And I am so much of a witch and an intuitive person and a seer and a creative and an artist. And I just have to accept that those two things exist with me. And I, you know, 9 to 5, I'm in this corporate world. And then outside of that, I'm doing all the other good stuff. And that's been a journey, probably like I would say an almost 7 year journey. So it all started when I had that grief and loss around the ectopic pregnancy, that I got invited to a retreat, a women's retreat in some woods in Hampshire. And at the time, I would say that I wasn't a very woman's woman. A lot of my friends were male. I hadn't had best experiences with women, whether that was school or in the corporate world. I was very kind of, there was a lot of that break the glass ceiling kind of at the time. And I was very allergic to those kind of things. And so to go to this like all women's retreat thing in some woods that I didn't know, with people I didn't know, you know, camping, which I hadn't done in ages. I didn't even have camping gear. And I was just like, fuck it, like I've got to go because I'm in such a bad place. I'm on my knees and I have no idea what to do or who can help me. And this person, so to go back to the story of the Jungian archetype psychometric tool, I had been introduced by a woman called Tracy McEachran, and she'd met me when I was doing a talk in Portsmouth. And she had offered to train me after I did the tool, and I loved it. And she needed a spare room to do this training. And so I put out on LinkedIn, does anyone have a room? And some random person that doesn't know me saw this on her feed, and her name was Kate Fismo, and she said, hey, I've got a room that you're welcome to use. And so I ended up using the room. She was a researcher in the University of Westminster on resilience. So I was like, oh, interesting person. I want to be your friend. And as an exchange to say thank you, I said, you know, would it be useful to have a coaching session? And it turned out that she wanted to leave that role to become self-employed. And I was like, great, I can help you with that. And so that's how we met. And when I went through my experience of grief, she sent me a message and she said, hey, this person that I know is a grief kind of worker, and she's got these woods and there's this retreat, and I've just gone through something similar to you, and I'm going, and I wondered if you wanted to go. So that's how all these pieces start to be placed together, and how, you know, the universe begins to drop you breadcrumbs. But that's how I ended up in these woods. And I listened to a myth called the Handless Maiden, and it was told by two women over the space of 3-4 days, and it completely changed / unraveled my life. and everything I thought I knew about the world. And I had no idea about the power of myth. At the time I was a corporate speaker, and this is why I introduce myself now as a storyteller, because it's very different, different kind of speaking. And I just listened to this myth, and I saw myself so much in the story of this young woman who gets her hands chopped off because of something her dad has, accidentally done. And it's this story of how she ends up getting her hands back in some way. And the journey that she goes on through the forest, and the people that she meets, and the lessons that she learns, and the pure magic of listening to that story. And it was also there that I began writing poetry for the first time since I was a child. So I had began to write poetry for the first time in those woods. That was an invitation that we'd been given, and that was just before my partner at the time had suggested that I join this creative writing group. And so it was awakening and touching into some things that had been kind of long forgotten. And then there were just these real magical elements of just time did a very funny thing. Like I think it was 4 or 5 days, ended up feeling like a month. And there was a woman that was in charge of the food, and she'd spend hours stirring the pot and singing into the food. And before we began to eat, there was an invitation to take some of our plate with a spoon and offer it to the ancestors, into the woodlands that we were in. And just small little details like that I was like, what is going on here? And little did I know that I was in a witch's woods. And what was interesting, it would take an entire season of podcast to tell you what happened after. But what was interesting is that that was the beginning of a very huge journey, and full of, gosh, I wouldn't even know how to summarize. And it was all because of this retreat. And, I found a healing that I couldn't quite get from therapy. And I'm a massive advocate of therapy, but something deeper. I needed to go deeper in my healing process, and something in the myth in the woods, the women that I was around really healed stuff. It healed stuff around my creativity and poetry and sisterhood. And I was like, how do I get more of this? And so I went down this massive kind of spiritual rabbit hole of like learning about all these things that I'd never heard of or knew about. And 5-6 years later, and I'm very, very deep in in that world. And I, it's an interesting thing to be in the corporate world, and also carry all this other stuff. And what was interesting is when I initially got hired, I would say that about a third of my team were incredibly witchy, which, if not more. And that was really curious, especially given the industry that we work in.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's a lot of people are starting to connect with their more spiritual side, and starting to realize there's more to life than, sort of 3D, what we see every day type of thing. And your story is not unique in that way, because I have come across more and more people, and myself as well, is, finding a connection with almost like what we've known in the past. Witches are not new. Shamanism is not new. Paganism is not new. It's not new to be part of nature, but yet it's feels new, or it's talked about, oh, this new thing, but it's not a new thing. It's ancient. It's been there, but as a society, it's been looked upon as bad. That's evil, or that's bad. I mean, we've got the witch trials. You just look in history and how they try to suppress all of this knowledge, all of this information. And I really love that more and more people are starting to find it in random different ways and getting connected to it without even realizing that there's a connection or finding their ways. As you said, you found your way, you found yourself in a witchy wood, but it's not something that you went towards. You were going for a totally different reason. And this is happening to so many people because I think now more than ever, we need to connect with something more powerful, whether it's being a witch, whether it's being a shaman, whether it's really digging into the more paganistic rituals that there were, because it all comes down to there's more to life. There's more in us. And yes, we call it woo-woo, but it's so much more than that. And I just love your story and how you found your way to it, and that you realizing there's more people out there. Like you said, about a third of your team is connected in that. And it just shows that you can have a balance of being in the corporate world as well as being spiritual in whatever way that you like. I have a friend who was very much in the corporate world, and yet she is a a shaman, and trained in that, and she's been doing it for I think 30 odd years, but still was in the corporate world before she retired. But it's connecting the two, because you're not that or that, but you both, and
Yeah.
having that connection.
And I think that there's probably a lot of that that's been happening, for ages, but it's just been very hidden or not talked about. There's no doubt that even celebrities are quite keen on talking about, my astrologer and my, shamanic practitioner. And, it's quite common. It's just not so talked about. Interestingly, there was a article just this week, I think it was in the Guardian, talking about the rise in paganism in the UK. And I'm not surprised. Given the state of the world, I'm not surprised that people are going towards, something that is much more nature and earth based magic, and something that feels accessible, and, people that have this sort of animistic approach to life. And I only imagine that there's going to be more of a rise towards that, and towards, like you said, it's nothing new. It's what our ancestors did, and we've just forgotten some of the things that they did that are really incredibly valuable, and there was a reason that they were doing it. And I'm currently in a 3-year mystery school, Celtic mystery school, which is called the Denny, and it's based on sort of Britain and Wales quite a lot in terms of the mythology that we cover. But very much, when my teacher's a woman called Angharad Wynne, and she talks very much, she says something that I really, really love, because it just makes it feel very ordinary in a way, like we're not doing anything crazy in here. But it's about how do we become the people that in the midst of the storm are in their center. And what are the practices, the things that we can do, the rituals, the ceremonies that keep us in touch with ourselves, with our community, that are there to support the wider community. And I think we've lost that. We don't live in those villages anymore. We don't have those communal practices so much anymore. And there's a reason why we're in the mess that we're in the world at the moment. And I think that coming back to those is really not just coming back to kind of earth and nature, but also to ourselves in a way that we've lost.
I'm reading a really beautiful book called Thunder and Deer, and unfortunately I can't pronounce his name, but I can't remember his name. But it's Thunder and Deer, and he's from the Andes or Peru, and he talks a lot about the ancestors, the Incas, and how they were suppressed and pretty much annihilated by the Spanish. But yet the people in the Andes were still able to find their culture and keep to their culture. And he said something in the book, is saying it's not about going to the past. It's not about bringing the past back, but it's about taking the teachings from the past and bringing them forward.
Mm.
And how can you, and he was talking about himself. So he was saying, how can I, as a shaman, as a healer, with this history from my ancestors, instead of living in the past and thinking, yes, 500 years ago, all our history was annihilated, we were suppressed, we were had to become Catholics, and the Spanish did a lot of harm. But instead of living in that, what can I bring that my people have carried with them? Because they still know where all the temples were, they still know where all the special place, spiritual places were, the water and all that. They still brought them with that. So you were saying, how can I be part of the future and not be living in the past? And I find that really interesting, because quite often when I have spoken to people about the spiritual journey, like whether it's witches or pagans or shamans, it's yes, but they did this or this happened to us, and it's like, okay, but do we live with that, or can we bring that forward? Can we bring that into, how do we take that knowledge of the witches and not live in the witch hunts, but take the knowledge of the herbs, the healing, nature, whichever direction you're going in, and bring that forward to helping, ourselves in that journey, but also the future generations, and really enlightening more and more people to embrace it into their lives. Because as you said, people are lost. I mean, the world is a very chaotic place at the moment. And bringing that in, as you said, in that storm, finding that center and being calm, and that center there, and knowing your center. And this, I think, is why it's so powerful what you're saying, because it's not a bad thing to be woo woo. I know, even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you sort of say, yes, I'm on a spiritual path. Oh, what are you, a hippie smoking dope in the garden? It's like, no, it's got nothing to do with that. It's about, the heart, the soul, the connecting to nature, and finding more in life than just what you can see and feel, and having that job and paying those bills. There's so much more to it. There's, as you said, source, God, spiritual, universe, whatever the words that you're wanting to use, but you can't see them, but you feel them. And it's just finding that way to connect. And like having the corporate world and the spiritual world, but connecting the two together and being good with that. And I think this is where a lot of people find that, like, a disconnect, because they can't bring the two together, because you either are corporate or you're the hippie in the garden smoking weed. But it's not like that. There's so much more to it. I know
Yeah,
I'm very much
and
generalizing, but
yeah, and you get that, right? Like, let's be honest, you do get the people that are in the clouds and in the sort of full hippie mode, and sort of forgot how to do the normal human stuff. I've seen that. It's there's no denying that. And you get people that have both, and then you get people that are ultra businessy and want to deny that they, have any intuition.
But one thing that was coming to me as you guys were talking is lots of the new beginnings, lots of the transformation, lots of these changes that are happening in the world, the universe, your life. New beginnings also means endings. And I can imagine that obviously there could be some specific traumas and grief that we all go through, but in a world that we live in, there's so many moments when new things are starting that we also have to learn how to work with our grief and closing a chapter and processing this kind of crossing of a threshold to the new level. And I know that you, on your journey, have often been quite open about kind of these experiences and thoughts. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about how do you, not necessarily handle grief, but how do you approach working with grief, making friends with grief, closing a chapter and processing that, crossing the threshold to the new plane of living?
Yeah, well, I can probably share a threshold that I'm about to cross. Obviously, I've told you a little bit about this journey that I've been on, and recently, something that came up in the last retreat of this school that I'm in, I've been thinking about, like, I would really love to do something to kind of honor the journey that I've been on, and to give some kind of offering. And so, after some discussions with my witchy friends, um, one of them had the idea of shaving my head. And interestingly, I'd been thinking about it about 2 days before she mentioned it. And I was like, she said, I either pull that from your head or I was reading into the same thing that you were. Um, and after she mentioned it, I kind of went to all these other friends and was like, oh, I'm playing around with this idea. I think I'd already made my mind up. But I thought maybe someone can convince me out of it. And, and interestingly, hair's been a really big part of my journey, especially in the corporate world. I blow dried my hair 2 to 3 times a week for many years. It was a ritual that I had with my mother up until I was sort of in my mid-20s. And so, there was this transition from like having perfectly blow dried hair constantly. And it was something that a lot of people talked about, always commenting and complimenting and talking about my hair. And then I went through this phase. As you can see now, it's all kind of fuzzy and natural and curly. And so we're gonna do like a ceremony and a ritual where the women that were part of this process and journey and those woods are gonna plait my hair and chop my plait off, and then we're gonna bury it in the woods where the journey began as an offering. And part of why I'm sharing that, because it's, especially in ceremony, we don't tend to talk about what we do, and I think there's some kind of mystery and a bit of like, oh, what does that look like, what does magic look like? It can look like that. And so maybe me sharing this with you is that's just sealing the deal. It's recorded. So it's happening. But yeah, that to me is marking a threshold of probably the maiden to mother crossing, in terms of this whole journey that I've been on, that came off the back of sitting and listening to a story in those woods. And where I'm going to next in my next chapter, and kind of letting go of the stories as well, is something that I'm really trying to do at the moment in different ways, and that feels like part of that process.
Thank you for sharing. And that's really powerful, because especially as a woman, hair is very much a big thing, is whether it's dyed the right color, styled right, blow dried, ironed, straight, curled, perms. I mean, you name the different type of hairstyles that have been over the years, but it has very much been part of, seen as a female is the hair. It's, is it right? And in corporate it has to be different, and when you're relaxed or anything. So I really admire what you're doing. I can sort of understand the symbolism around doing the hair, because it's something that I have thought about, but I'm not brave enough to do it. Sometimes when it's like 30 degrees and it's hot, yes, but I think that's more that it's hot. But it's something that I know a couple of women who've done that, and they say the relief and the freedom that they've had through doing it. So thank you. And I wish you the best in the ceremony. It sounds amazing, and you sound like you've got the right people around you, and doing it in a ceremony can be really special and can really help to transition from this hair, and I'm your hair, to your new hair, because it will be something new that comes. It's not just a haircut and changing a style, but it can sometimes be very different once you shaved your head from what it was to what it is. So it's a
Yeah.
really powerful thing that you're doing, and it's a real transition. It's a physical transition as well. So
It is. It can be more subtle than that, to answer your question, Lenka. I'm not encouraging everyone to go off and do that when they're having major life transitions, but for me, that it felt right when it was said, as reluctant as I am, because I am precious about it. But yeah, it feels like the right thing to do, and the right timing as well.
And I also think that, hair, and Natalie touched on it with for us, for women or anyone, often can be tied to our ancestry, to our culture, to our history. And I know that lots of your journey has been very much your ancestry, your history, your family. And I can imagine that, you have very specific type of hair that then possibly in corporate could not be seen as professional, to have it wild and free, to have it, tame it, have to control it. So I can definitely see some underlying themes possibly inviting you to have the hair as the symbolism for this step.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like you said, there's some symbolism in it in terms of kind of letting go, but also that rebirth of what comes next. And also, I've gone through all of this change, and there's been a whole kind of shedding of identities, and also accepting, parts of myself, as we talked about at the start. And for me, this is, just kind of almost closing off that process that doesn't ever really stop, but it's kind of putting a marker of, this is where that bit ends.
this topic has gone all over the place, and really loving it. And it's something that, we can go down so many different avenues, and there's so much in this. This is the part where we have what we call a gold nugget. This is where we ask, Alex, may we please have your gold nugget?
I am going to share with you a very short micro poem called The Medicine that I've written, and it goes like this. But first, a spoonful of love. The end. That's it. That's the message. Underlying everything always.
Love it. Thank you. And short but sweet. Now, for our listeners, if they wanting to connect with you, they want to know more about what it is that you're doing, the courses that you do, or just getting into your circle or finding out a bit more, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, I'm still on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. Alexandra Galviz or Authentic Alex. My website, www.authenticalex.com, or on Instagram, which is at I am Authentic Alex.
And obviously all those links will be in description below, so people can click and find you if they feel that they want a little bit more of the corporate part. If they want more professional, they can head over to LinkedIn. If they want more of the real behind the scenes, the witchy lifestyle, they can follow on Instagram. And from there, they can always go on to your Substack blog post as well, where
Ah,
if
yes, that.
anything, if anything resonated, because that's where
Yeah,
I'm kind of keeping up a little bit with you. That's
yeah.
where I kind of feel like I know a little bit about your journey, because you are very open about your journey and you've over the years shared a lot. So that's a great place for people to also observe your writing and be inspired by your journey and see, if any of the themes that we touched on today resonated with them. I am pretty sure there will be a blog post or two on the topic going deeper.
Yeah, for sure. That one on Substack, it's called With Love and Magic.
And again, underlines beautifully the conversation we were talking about, your golden nugget. But here in the podcast, we are a little greedy and we always want a little extra. We always try to squeeze in a little extra question at the end. And I like to always remind our listeners and ourselves that the mission of this podcast is to find ways to have happier, healthier, more fulfilled lives, to figure out how we can lean more into our lives. And I'm always curious then with our guest what it is that gives you life right now. It can be something that you talked about, it can be something that is unrelated to the conversation, but right now, where you are, what gives you life?
I am currently back painting, and I've not been painting for about 3 years. And so it's been quite the process to, as you can see in the back, it's been quite the process to start again. But I feel like it's giving me a whole lease of life that I had forgotten it gives me. So for me, it's painting, but for you, it might be whatever else creative wise, whether that's pottery or writing or painting with oils or anything creative, I think is really important in our life.
Thank you so much. Thank you for, your time today, your journey, and sharing your transition that you are going through at the moment, and but also sharing your journey and the moments that have caused you grief, but how you've got through it. And it's really powerful to hear people's stories, because stories help, and stories can really guide others. And you said you are a storyteller, so you have told us a few stories, which has been really beautiful. So thank you so much for your time, for your energy, and just being with us today. And it has been a long time coming, so we really, really do appreciate you being with us today.
No, thanks so much for having me, and it was wonderful. I really enjoyed your questions.
And for our listeners, what have you got from today? We have gone on a journey. We have talked about witches. We have gone the woo-woo way. We have talked about woods. We have even talked about corporate and writing. There's been so much in this episode. We would love to know, what aha moments have you got? What has Alex's stories helped you, or guiding you, or giving you a thought of something that you might not have thought of doing? Or is there something that helps you to find your way when you feel lost and on your knees in grief? What has helped you? We would love to know your thoughts. But until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.